This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review with Gilad Halpern.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, a program dedicated to the word, to the thought and to debate. I'm your host Gilad Halpern, and every week I'll be engaging in close encounters of the intellectual kind with writers and scholars, or simply people of ideas of all types and vocations who have done something to make our lives a tad more interesting. My guest today teaches Middle East history at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and is the author of a new book entitled 1929, Year Zero of the Arab-Israeli Conflict, that was recently published in English by Brandeis University Press. The book goes back to the violent Palestinian uprising of the summer of 1929 that left dozens of Jews dead across the country and analyzes its aftermath that can still be felt to this day. Professor Hillel Cohen, welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so the 1929 uprising is just one in a string of outbursts of sectarian violence that swept pre-state Israel in the 1930s and 40s. Why do you think 1929 occupies such a prominent place in the history of the conflict?
I think the events of 1929, of August 1929, were mainly for the Jews a kind of watershed in their relation with the Arabs. This is one reason, and the other reason is that these events, in a sense, consolidated the Jewish yishuv, the Jewish community in Palestine, into one community much more than it was before.
Watershed in the sense that their perception of what their relationship with the indigenous Palestinians might look like in the future?
Exactly, in the sense that before 1929 there were much more Jews who believed or hoped that it is possible to reach an agreement with the Arabs of Palestine regarding the future of this country. And many people believe that Jews come here, many Jews believe that the Jews come here to Palestine, to Eretz Israel, in order to live peacefully with the Arabs, and the Arabs would accept their coming into here, despite the fact that politically the Arabs rejected the Zionist idea from the very beginning, and we know that the resistance to Zionism started already from the 1890s, with the beginning of Zionism in Palestine. But still there were these hopes that the Arabs will understand, so to speak, that Zionism is benefit for everybody, not only for the Jews, and they will accept also the British hegemony that supported Zionism.
And why was 29 so significant in this sense? Why wasn't it? Why didn't the penny drop in 1921 when there were violent events in Palestine too?
First of all, the events of 1929 were, from the perspective of the scale of violence, much more significant than the violence in 1920 or 1921. And secondly, there were the massacres in Hebron and also in Tzfat were so brutal that it changed the mind of people. Attacks on 4, 5, 6 people, as happened in the early 20s, could have been and were considered by people as kind of resistance, but a small one. Something that we can get along with, we can overcome it. But when it came to 1929, and it is mainly maybe the destruction of the Jewish community in Hebron, which was a very ancient community, led more people to believe, okay, these people, we cannot trust them anymore, we cannot live in peace, they do not want us here, we should be much stronger, and we should actually build our power, our force, our military.
So this is what you meant by saying that it consolidated the Jewish community. Was it in 1929 that they started preparing for a military conflict that 19 years later, in 1948, would come to pass?
Yes. It is true, of course, that the Haganah, the pre-IDF forces, were established in already in 1920, but they were not very much organized. It was not sporadic, but, small groups of activists here and there. But the idea of an organization that would be part of and became also the essence of the Jewish yishuv, and also to the idea that these people that are the fighters who took upon themselves to protect the Jewish issue, these people become the heroes of the issue. And it gave to Zionism, I would say, the color of, I wouldn't say a militaristic approach, but it gave the militaristic version of Zionism much more weight in the general Zionist approach.
Would you say, as a historian, that this was the crossroads in history where Jabotinsky's Iron Wall paradigm took hold and became prominent?
Yes, actually the idea of Iron Wall, it's true that it is a kind of, the term was coined by Jabotinsky, but also Ben-Gurion and Moshe Sharet, after 1929, they didn't use the same term, but they said exactly the same, that we should be much stronger. We have to, and also Jabotinsky said it, to have the protection of Britain, but also to build our own capacities as nation of warriors.
And Ben-Gurion and Sharet became convinced of that after 1929. Was it really the watershed for them? Therefore, Jabotinsky's ideas permeated to the wider spectrum of the political leadership?
Exactly. I don't think that there was any debate between them about this point.
The interesting thing about the events of 1929 that you mentioned earlier, that the victims, in large part, were the communities of Hebron and Safed and other old Yishuv communities that were there long before Zionism came to this land. And therefore, it is ironic, sadly, that these people paid the price for Zionism. What do you have to say about that?
That's true, but we can look at that from two different perspectives. One perspective is that actually these people, it's true that they were the old Yishuv, some of them, and they were not the kind of Zionists that we used to when we think of Zionists, we think about the socialist or the revisionist who came from Eastern Europe to settle in Palestine. But after the Balfour Declaration, most of them accepted the Balfour Declaration. They were happy with the Balfour Declaration. And in that sense, they put themselves, in the eyes of the Palestinian Arabs, in the same camp with the Zionist movement. So the Arabs of Hebron, for example, they did not differentiate in the political level, not in the social level. In the political level, they did not differentiate between the regular Zionists and the old Yishuv Zionists. For them, it was the same. So this is one perspective. The other perspective, which is also very important, is that the fact that these communities were attacked and were not able to defend themselves, this symbolized the need to have strong defense forces. So it also proved the same point that Zionism is the only answer, and Zionism or military capacities of Zionism are very important.
So in this sense, it served the purpose to consolidate the Yishuv into perhaps one community, whereas there were some differences before as to the future and veracity of Zionism, and now it served as some sort of a rallying cry.
Yeah, very much so. I checked the list of members of the Haganah, and it is very clear that between 1929 there were very few Sephardi Jews in the Haganah. They thought that this is not their business, and they also believed that their contacts with the Arabs are enough to protect them from Arab attacks. But in 1929, the Arabs told them, so to speak, that, you are part of the Zionist aspiration, you are part of the Zionist movement, you are not our brethren anymore. So this pushed them also to join the armed forces.
Which, in a way, is a similar story to the Jewish communities in other Arab countries, that only as in reaction to the rejection of the local Arabs and, their lumping together of the local Jews with Zionism, that they became Zionists themselves.
Yes and no, because this is very complicated dynamics, because the Jews in Iraq, for example, they were invited into the Arab national movement, and they were hesitant between them and Zionism. So some Jews joined the Arab national movement, some Jews supported Zionism, but in Iraq and in other places, the fact that you are a Jew became a bit later, but it started in 1929, that if you are a Jew, it means that you support Zionism. If you support Zionism, you are against the Arab national movement. If you are against the Arab national movement, you cannot be part of our community. So this is dynamic that led at the end to the end of Jewish presence in these countries.
Do you think that this dynamic started from the Palestinian side by looking at the Jews and saying, okay, there's really no difference between Jewish and Zionist?
No, it was a combination of Zionist idea and Arab national idea, because the Zionist idea also was, the Zionist movement presented itself as the representative of the Jews all over the world. So the Zionist movement also told the Arabs that these Jews in Iraq or in Egypt, they are part of the Zionist movement. So what can the Arabs there do? So in the Arab national movement, there were two schools. The school that separated religion from state and said, no, the Jews can be part of us. And there were more, we can say, radical group or Islamist groups who said, to be an Arab nationalist, you cannot be a Jew. But there was debate between these two schools. After 1929 and other events later in the history, it was very difficult to be at the same time a Jew and Arab nationalist, because as a Jew you have a kind of loyalty, a kind of identification with the Jews in Palestine, even if you are not a devoted Zionist.
Okay, let's go back to 1929 and your book. And one of the interesting things about it is that it really tells the story from the two perspectives, the Jewish and the Palestinian perspectives. And even more interesting is the fact that they are very, very, very different from each other. And even the legacy of the 1929 events, the narrative, if you want to call it, the narratives are very different.
Yes, this is what I reached during the study toward the writing of the book. Because when I began with the study, I believed that I know everything about 1929. And in a sense, I was looking for, when I spoke with Palestinians and read Palestinian materials, I was looking for a kind of remorse that Palestinians would say what we have done in Hebron is horrible and so on and so forth. So, of course, there are some voices like this. And, of course, which is much more important, many Palestinians in Hebron saved Jews during the massacres. So, of course, we have this approach. But generally speaking, when I read history books, Palestinian history books, they do not take it seriously, what happened in Hebron. They said there were clashes between Jews and Arabs killed many Jews, for example, very in a simplified way to put it. And then I started to think, how come that they see such horrible events in such a, again, not serious way? Then it was in the days of the Israeli attacks in Gaza, in which hundreds of kids, Palestinian kids, were killed by the Israeli army, and the Israelis never took it too seriously. So I understood something which is very banal, very trivial, that, everybody look at his own victims and believes that they were victims of aggression. And when the same side is the aggressor, he doesn't take it too seriously, the victims of the other side. So we know it very well from we have many instances for that. But when I took this event of 1929, which is so important in Zionist narrative, and it doesn't have the same weight in the Palestinian narrative, I understood it much better. And then I took also events in which, Jews attacked Arabs in Jerusalem, in Jaffa, in other places, in Haifa, and they usually are not mentioned in Israeli historiography. And I said, look, the events even were much more complicated. It's not exactly that one side massacred the other. There were different kinds of violence here. In Jerusalem, the Jews and Arabs were more or less the same number, and Jews actually killed Arabs before Arabs killed Jews in Jerusalem, or exactly at the same time. There was a commission of inquiry, and it was very difficult for them to decide who was the first, but it's not very important. It was more or less in the same hour. And in Tel Aviv, Jaffa, again, the Jews and Arabs, same numbers. They both are equipped with weapons, and they have attacks and counterattacks. In Hebron, it's different because it was a very small Jewish community, minority community, unarmed, which was attacked. So we have all these kinds of events. And then when you read what was written about that in Hebrew books or in Arabic books, you see each side cries for his own victims and don't give a damn about the others.
Did it change anything with the British perspective of the Jewish-Arab relations in Palestine? Was it a watershed moment for them as well?
It was a beginning of a change because the British came to Palestine with the idea of what is called the dual commitment to establish a Jewish national home in Palestine on the one hand and to enable the non-Jews in Palestine to continue their life and to protect their rights and so on and so forth. So they had these two ideas in mind, but slowly in 1929 it was a very important event in that sense. They realized that it cannot go together, that you cannot establish a Jewish national home against the will of the Arabs of Palestine. So they tried to change their attitude towards the Balfour Declaration, and they had the white paper at that time, and it was changed because of Weizmann, Chaim Weizmann, the president of the Zionist movement at that time. He managed to change the white paper and not to have these restrictions on Jewish immigration and Jewish settlement in Palestine. And this in turn led to the Arab Revolt of 1936. So you can see that this is a very important stage in the process that led to the white paper of 1939.
And to the idea of partition later further down the line?
Yeah, and to the idea of partition.
It all started around the Western Wall in Jerusalem when the Palestinian Arabs thought the Jews were changing the status quo there. I mean, it all sounds vaguely familiar. I mean, obviously, over the past few months, we had similar claims 86 years on. I mean, so little has changed. Do you think that, really the DNA of the conflict is really the same in 1929 and 2015?
Yes, I think it is the very ideas, the very emotions, it is more or less the same. And we have here two paradigms that we can use. One is a religious one, one is a national one. But we have to remember that both in Zionism and in the Arab Palestinian national movement, there's no real differentiation between religion and nationalism. So when the Jews return to Zion, as the Zionists say, they do it because this is Zion, and Zion is a Temple Mount, actually. And it is true that secular Jews, they do not want to build the Temple Mount. But you have also groups in the Jewish Yishuv at that time and in Israel today that their vision is that there will be a Jewish temple on Temple Mount. Now, for the Palestinians, also their identity was consolidated around Al-Aqsa and around Al-Haram al-Sharif, because this is a place where the main issue in Palestinian identity is the protection of the holy places, and this goes back to the days of the Crusaders and so on. So the Muslim community in Palestine, since the Ayyubid period, I mean in the 20th, 30th century, they believe that they have mission. They are not here just to live. They are here in order to protect it from invasions from the West or from Jewish invasion. So this has a long history, and in 1929 it was a very important moment also in this regard, because the religious and national aspects of the conflict came together.
Mm-hmm. And it's so depressing to see that still today, I mean, after all this long history of the two communities living together, so little has changed in their propensity and their willingness of each of these communities to accept the legitimacy of the other.
Yes, of course. If we take it from religious perspective, or the more common religious perspective, you have two main religions here, which is Islam and Judaism. And the idea is, if Islam is true, Judaism is not true. If Judaism is true, Islam is not true. And the place that symbolizes it is the Temple Mount, Haram al-Sharif, because if we are the chosen people, of course, God gave us this place, and we have the right to build our temple there. But if it is true that Muhammad was sent to the people in order to bring his new message, and the new message is that now the people who are beloved by God is the people who accepted the message of Islam. So you cannot go back and say, this is a place of the Jews. No, this is the place of the believers, meaning the Muslims. You cannot accept Jews there. And you can, if you are a Muslim, you cannot accept the Muslims if you are a Jew. I mean, this is a mainstream. Of course, we have both in Judaism and Islam people who say, let's let God decide it in the last day, and we can today find a way to live together. But today these are very marginalized voices.
And of course, they are being fed by the political conflict that's going on. That's part of the matrix. Professor Hillel Cohen of the Middle East Department at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and author of the newly published 1929 Year Zero in the Arab-Israeli conflict. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you very much.
That brings us to the end of our show today. Thank you very much for listening. Also, big thanks to Alex Benish, the technical producer of this show. I'm Gilad Halpern, signing off here in Tel Aviv. Do join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, goodbye.
Awake from dream, years I've been chasing, looking to a predator, dear, see our reflection. We run through fire that feels like the sea, and I can cover myself with these dreams. Blindfolded, eyes are closed, and I'm in a strong, not cold. Your hand, it holds me close, and you are beautiful. I'll follow you. Crossroad of what I've been told and what my heart knows. I choose to be open, my future unknown, my past is long gone. Ain't life like a road that one takes with all its wrong turns and blessed mistakes? But do I have to walk it alone? I feel like the answer is no. Now if you let me do, walking this road not alone but in two, I want to share it with you.